This is HBTV. I'm Harry Binswanger. I'm a philosopher. I discuss all kinds of wild issues from the standpoint of the philosophy of objectivism, Ayn Rand, as I understand it. And I understand it pretty damn well, having devoted my life to it, having a PhD in philosophy, and having been close to Ayn Rand, an associate in my early days, and then at the end of her life, in my 30s, I was a good friend. So let's talk about experts. Follow the science. Follow the science. Well, what is the science? What is an expert? What is your role in judging what the experts tell you? I'm going to speak in principle with two concretes to apply it to. No, it's not Dr. Fauci. I don't know what to, how to evaluate him. I don't necessarily have a negative view of him at all. I don't necessarily have a positive view, but that's too narrow. I would need to get enmeshed in a lot of details and facts. No, I'm going to talk about two things that you and I have enough information to judge the experts on, and that's evolutionary psychology and global warming / climate change. What is the science that we're supposed to follow? What is the value of an expert? How do you judge an expert's assertions? There are a number of different considerations that you have to apply. First, is it an expert? Is this somebody who has the credentials to be an expert by whatever standards there are in his field? For instance, Michael Mann of the University of Virginia is an expert in climate science by the standards of the field. Several professors who wanted to debate me on evolutionary psychology, at least two, are experts in their field. E.O. Wilson was really the kind of founder of that field. It was called sociobiology. And I believe his degree is from Harvard. I mean, these are reputable people, as opposed to some internet troll that you see an assertion by, and he says, well, I'm an expert, or I've looked into this, I've studied it in detail. Yeah, he surfed 5 sites, and that does not qualify him as an expert. So the first thing, if you're evaluating an expert, is he legitimately an expert? Is he trained in the field? Is he knowledgeable? Has he been in quite a long time? Is he respected in his field? Then now that's generally understood today. The next one, we kind of leave most people behind. Is it a rational field? Is it a rational field? What do you mean? What's not to like? What's not a rational field? Well, witchcraft. You know, someone is an expert in astrology or witchcraft is not going to be credible. He's not going to have standing to influence your ideas on anything that he says. Now, for instance, climate science is a rational field, but evolutionary psychology is not a rational field. And I will say again why it is not in the upcoming discussion. So is it a valid field? Is it a field that uses reason and observation to come to conclusions, or is it a field where people consult horoscopes or look at the phases of the moon and go with their feelings? Too much of philosophy has been that, I'm ashamed to say, in recent years. So the person who's an expert should be an expert only by virtue of the division of labor. What do I mean by that? Well, he specialized in this. He spent the time. You could have done it. You could have done it, even if you're not of high intelligence and it's nuclear physics. You could have done it, only it would have taken you maybe 2 centuries to get where the average practitioner, if you're not too bright. I don't mean to insult you. Some of you are a lot brighter than the average nuclear physicist. I guess we call them particle physicists now. But what you're counting on, if you really cite someone as an expert or go along with the expert, is that he has put in the time in a rational field, using reason and observation, using his critical faculties. He's not a seer, a psychic, a guru. Now, it extends to things that are a little more subtle than that, where it becomes a quasi-mystical source, as we'll get to later. But the obvious cases establish the principle, and that's a principle. Get your principles from obvious cases. Don't get your principles from borderline or difficult or controversial cases. If it's an expert telling you something that you should pay attention to and give credence to, he should be able to explain it in outline, in general principle. He should not be saying, well, look, I've put in 12 years to get a PhD and then a fellowship at Harvard. And believe me, I'm using reason and science all the time. I mean, I can't explain it. You just have to trust me. No, he should be able to say something to make it intelligible to you, what he claims. Your doctor, for instance, doesn't just say, he's a reputable expert, I hope, mine is, in a rational field by anybody's standards. It's not some mystical insight he gains. It's time on task, specialization that gives him his expertise. But he will always tell you why, and he's recommending what he's doing and what's going on, and it should make sense to you. Now, there's certain things that are in very advanced, very technical fields that may not make sense to you. For instance, suppose it's quantum physics, and he says something about quantum weirdness, two electrons that are paired in their generation and have opposite spins can seemingly communicate across the galaxy instantaneously. And there's a lot of evidence for this, but I can't explain it without getting into superposition, the collapse of the wave function and so forth. Maybe somebody else can, but I can't. I went to MIT and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that means you cannot dismiss it. That's a new category. Okay, maybe. I'm dubious, but I can't say it's wrong. I can't say it's invalid. I'm going to say some things are wrong and invalid that experts tell us. But just because he can't explain a very technical thing to you in terms you can understand makes you suspicious, makes you wary, makes you say, I can't sign up for this, but maybe, I would have to look into it further. It doesn't make sense to me, but I'm not in the field. That's a position. That's a reasonable position. Does the expert have a motive to distort? For instance, is he an economist? A rational field, a valid field, a trained economist who is a Donald Trump supporter on the one hand, or a Bernie Sanders supporter. In our country, it would be someone I don't, in your country, in the UK, it would be someone I don't know. Does he have strong ideological commitments on the political spectrum that could lead him to distort the science? Now, for instance, if he's a scientist, if he's in medicine and he says it's better to keep hydrated when you're older. And here's the studies if you want to look at them. Your tissue can't retain water as well. You have to keep replacing it, so it makes sense. It doesn't matter what his politics are, but if he's an economist, it does. So would he have a motive to distort? Does he have a motive to distort? Now, merely having a motive doesn't disqualify him. He could convince you, for instance, Martin Anderson. Martin Anderson graduated from Harvard as a leftist, went into economics, and the facts, he researched urban renewal, and the facts convinced him, I was wrong. The government shouldn't be in this. It's a disaster, and the disaster comes from government. So the fact that you have a commitment doesn't mean you are going to let that govern your thinking, but it raises the question. Are there counter experts who say the opposite? Now, there always will be, one guy. But is there a non-fringe group of scientists, if it's a science, who disagree with the mainstream consensus? Even if it's one guy, if you listen to that guy and he's well-trained, he makes good arguments, the field is dubious for certain reasons, ideological or financial, you can give some credence. Well, maybe, but that raises the final thing, or the next to final thing. You don't use experts for theoretical knowledge. So we're talking about the use of experts to say the earth is in danger of burning up or having violent storms due to man's emissions, and that we should cut them back, you should recycle, whatever. That's not theoretical knowledge. If he says, on the other hand, the Glitzman equation governs the dispersion of heat in the troposphere, except for the effect of cosmic rays, unless you're in that field, of course, I made up, there's no Glitzman, but you cannot say, okay, he's an expert, that's probably true. You cannot use somebody's say-so as a substitute for getting the knowledge required to understand. To adopt a theory, you have to know that the theory, the basis that makes people assert the theory. But a policy or a concrete is different. So it's not, whatever even Ayn Rand, who I think was the greatest expert in philosophy and in some other fields that there ever was, if she said Heidegger is evil, and she didn't say that, but I'll say it, I couldn't, I would take that as, well, maybe I'll look into it, but I don't know why he's evil because she said that. Or a proposition is so-and-so. Okay, what does that mean? You don't even understand the theory. You don't understand what it's saying unless you know the inductive grounds that support that theory, that lead to that theory. So you cannot use it as a means of gaining theoretical knowledge. Finally, I said the other one, that was the penultimate. The final thing is, in no case can you have certainty through expert testimony. In no case can you have certainty. You can say, oh, well, listen, 3 doctors recommended I have this surgery. They gave me good explanations. They all came from great medical schools. They have good ratings on whatever it is I consult for the ratings. They all spoke plausibly. They all gave independently the same explanation as to why this should be done. It's very likely the right thing to do. But you can't say, oh, now I know, I'm certain. I know this is right. You can say I have no doubts in action, but you can't say that this is like arithmetic to me. 2 and 2 is 4, and I should have this surgery. It is not the same. You cannot get knowledge secondhand. You cannot gain certainty secondhand. But that doesn't matter a lot, because once you get to the point of, I'm very confident, there's very, very good grounds to trust what these people recommend. That's all you need. You don't need some certainty beyond that you have no doubt in action. I'm kind of ready now to apply those, but maybe, Nikos, first of all, I didn't call on you to say if you have some scheduling and informational things.
It's okay. I think our audience by now knows the order of things. So first of all, we give priority to super chat questions. So feel free to send your super chats, and then Raz is going to forward them to us. We also have some questions from Ayn Rand Center UK members. So if you're an ARC UK member, you can send your questions in advance. And whenever we have some time, we're going to ask these questions. I have 3 questions today for Harry, and this is how we will do it. So again, it's one of the perks of being a member of ARC UK, besides the fact that you support us. So check out arcuk.com/membership and consider becoming a member now. So Harry, we have 4 questions. None of them seem to be directly relevant.
All right, well, I have another general point before I get to what should raise questions.
Good, so let's go with you.
No one is more of an expert than anyone else in philosophy. I said Ayn Rand was an expert in philosophy. You can be very well versed in philosophy, but you have to be, let's put it this way, maybe that isn't the best formulation. You have to be your own expert on philosophy. And you can, and you should, and you must. Why? Because philosophy does not deal with specialized information that you have to go into the lab to test out. Philosophy doesn't require a microscope or telescope or a particle accelerator. It doesn't require surveys. It doesn't require statistics. Philosophy is the science that studies the fundamentals of what it is to be alive. That is, of man and man's relationship to existence. Fundamentals, things like, is reality out there? Can I know it? What's the good? What should I do with my life? How should I act? What is the moral purpose of government? That's about all what is art? What does art do? That's all. Those are the questions with a million sub-questions that philosophy is concerned with. But everybody has the data. Everybody has the data, and everyone has the ability to make the connections that are required. For instance, is reality out there? Let me tell you a story about one of my old girlfriends. She was introduced to the writings of Ayn Rand by someone who was very fervently advocating it. And she was told, look, existence exists. And my friend said, how do I know it exists? I mean, there's supposedly a table here in front of me, but maybe it's an illusion. How do I know it's not a dream? And her friend said, hit your head against it. And after one beat, my old girlfriend said, oh. And that was her conversion to objectivism. Conversion in quotes, it's not a religion. That was her understanding of, hey, we're not playing games here. I had a similar thing when I first heard Ayn Rand speak, which was my introduction to to philosophy and to objectivism. In the question period, someone asked her, are you an atheist? And she said, of course. Just like if you said, do you think automobiles need tires? Of course. Or do you wear clothes when you go outside? Yeah, of course. What are you talking about? So it was in that tone of voice. So it's a simple factual question. Is there some being floating up in the sky that was revealed to nomads 3,000 years ago, but hasn't been seen since, who is worrying about us in the universe? No, I don't believe that. And I heard in my own mind, of course. I wasn't committed to atheism. I was kind of I was dallying with atheism. But when I heard her say, of course, I thought, yeah, of course, it's just a factual issue. And that's what my friends, oh, you mean we're not playing games? This is not about, well, what if maybe there's, this is about what is the nature of the things in front of you and how you're living your life, what you're doing today, what you're doing tomorrow, the world you live in, and the nature of the people you deal with, or any people, man qua man. So in philosophy, you have to be your own expert. And you can be, and you must be. So that I wanted to add. And now, are there questions before I go into
yes, of course. So
application?
Okay, super chats. First question is from Jose. Jose, thank you very much for your question. So he says, Rihenbach, Rise of Scientific Philosophy. It's a book. And then he says, or, so people, if you can be a bit more specific with your questions, otherwise I'll paraphrase them. So I assume our friend here, Harry, asks your opinion on the book, Rise of Scientific Philosophy by Rihenbach, and whether you are whether you're aware of it.
I'm not aware of that book particularly. Hans Rihenbach was a philosopher in the early 20th century, and I believe he's in the phenomenological tradition, which is certainly he's pro-sense data, believes that we live in a world of appearances. That's my understanding. I had to read him for my PhD readings, and he's very difficult. Okay. So I would say any philosopher who believes that we are in a world of appearances, not reality, has emptied the term appearance of all meaning. It's like saying all the money is counterfeit and always was. Money always was counterfeit. It is counterfeit. Well, counterfeit of what? Or everything's only a copy. A copy of what? Of another copy. Another copy of what? There has to be perception of reality to distinguish appearances from, oh, it looked like Joe, but it was Joe's brother. Well, you have to know what Joe looks like to realize, oh, that wasn't Joe in the end. And you have to know what this guy looks like and see that. So there's, I believe that Rihenbach is on that axis of what's called sense data theory, and I would stay away from him.
Okay. Jose, hopefully your question is answered about the book. So next question, a very good question by Marilyn. Thank you so much, Marilyn, again, once more for your contributions. So can you delegate brain surgery, but you have to understand philosophy for yourself?
Yeah. That was quick. What is what? You first of all, you can't even do your own brain. I suppose you could with a mirror or something, but you would be well advised to use another doctor. But I know a brain surgeon. I took neuroanatomy on the graduate level. I performed brain operations on rats to learn the procedures. But that doesn't make me an expert by any stretch of the imagination. But anyway, I don't get what causes the question.
Let me tell you how I understand the question. So
please.
Now with the Ayn Rand Center every Saturday in the peak of courses, we're doing objectivism through induction. And I have to say, for me, it was almost a shock, because I always consider that, okay, the way you understand philosophy, yes, it is about something out there, but basically you read the book and now I know it. And so many 7 years or something in objective is the idea that, oh, I have to understand philosophy from reality. Although in theory also I knew that, it was almost a shock that it took me weeks to start understanding what is happening here.
Yes. They see we're trained, the model of knowledge that we work with is geometry. Did you take geometry in high school?
Yeah.
I did too. And I liked it pretty much. And I still use it to this day. I go around trying to reprove the Pythagorean theorem. I've done that a lot. So you get the idea of deduction, but the idea of induction, it's a lot harder and it's a different method. And that's what science actually uses. And that's what philosophy actually uses. Deduction is application, but how do you get to the theory that you then apply? So philosophy is not deductive. Even math is basically inductive. Basically, at root, there's a lot of deductive steps, a lot. But the basic concepts of 1, 2, direction, angle, those kinds of things are from experience. So anyway, yeah, it's the tendency is to think that philosophy is a priori, as they call it, a deductive engine, but it isn't. Good philosophy isn't.
Can I ask a follow-up on the a priori thing? So how would you reply to someone who is, let's say, an advocate of the Austrian school, someone who follows Mises or Hoppe, and they say, look, do we have to go and test every time that, for example, if the amount of money rises in the economy, there's going to be inflation? Or do we have to go and test every time that, all other things being equal, a monopoly by government is going to create a lower quality at a higher price? So why not take them as deductive truths, they say?
That's a terrific question, and it ultimately feeds into the topic today, because we're talking about the role of the scientists in public policy. It's a false alternative. Mises is a great economist, Ludwig von Mises, one of the greatest of all time, certainly the greatest of the 20th century. But when he turned to philosophy, he didn't do the original work he did in economics. And his philosophy worked with false alternatives like statistics versus deduction. In the beginning of Human Action, he says a lot of outrageous things, because there he's talking about the philosophy of economics. And he says the basic principles of economics are a priori. Well, that is impossible. That would mean an infant in his crib knows supply creates its own demand, one of the principles of economics. Or your example, inflating the money supply will cause prices to go up, other things equal. I think he just, I don't think he really disagreed with the right viewpoint. I think he just hadn't thought of how to describe it correctly. It's not a priori, it's learned from experience, but it integrates with everything you know so that it doesn't have to be retested. It's as certain as the basic axioms and basic self-evidencies that you know and use every day, like things fall down. You know, now that's not a priori. You had to learn that. And you probably spent time as an infant pushing things off the table and watching them fall. It's not a priori, meaning before experience, but you don't have to test it the next time. If I drop this heavy weight on my toe, will it fall or float away? You don't have to test that. So a false alternative of uncertainty, like bare ignorance, combined with statistics, and omniscience coming from another world before birth, both of those are wrong. Plato's wrong and David Hume is wrong, putting it in philosophical terms. You need logic applied to observation. That's what induction is.
That was very helpful, Harry. Thanks, because that was something that was confusing me for ages. Okay, so these were the relevant questions. Let me check. Another follow-up. Can you also comment on the seemingly widespread use of the word nuance to keep a skeptical attitude alive. So people saying, well, things are nuanced, or take this, or you don't take into account how nuanced, I don't know, ethics or right and wrong is.
I was told by a media trainer, never say that's a great question. The audience doesn't want to hear it, but it is a great question. that is something that is, the two words that they use to muddy things up is you've got nuance and simplistic. Simplistic is the word that they use to attack undeniable truths that people are trying to evade. Like, look, if you raise the minimum wage by government decree, some people will not be able to get jobs. No, things are much more nuanced than that. You can't make a sweeping comment like that. There's different labor markets with different friction of ease of entry and not easy. Things are much more complicated. Don't be simplistic. And I say the truth, basic truth, is always simple. Basic truths, fundamental truths are always simple. Why? Because if they aren't, you've formed your concepts wrong, and you've got to make concepts that make them simple. So if you have a concept that puts together peanut butter, phonograph records, and my feelings for my late mother-in-law, and you call that restruction, now suddenly life gets very complex, because is crunchy peanut butter restruction? How about my feelings for my living sister-in-law? Is that restruction? There's no way to know, because you've made your concepts into a hodgepodge that doesn't separate nature at the joints. But if you make concepts like there's what's real and true and what's made up and false, there's what serves your life and what destroys it. There's voluntary action, and then there's coerced action. Suddenly everything becomes quite simple because you made your concept simple. Now, it's not the case that you can be simple about low level. That's an ambiguous term. More concrete things. Is Dr. Fauci a good person, a bad person, someone who acted correctly or incorrectly? That's not simple. There's a lot of nuance there, because you're dealing with rich concretes with many attributes, some pointing this way, some pointing that way. But if you're dealing with broad fundamentals, the whole idea is to make them clear. Ayn Rand had this phrase: you need black and white principles to separate out the black and the white elements that make up gray. If something is gray, like the background behind me, it's a mixture of some black and some white. And in philosophy, black means false or evil, and white means true or good. So you have to separate out those two. So the principles have to be pure in order to analyze the mixed cases that have a lot of opposite things in them in reality. So yes, nuance is it's like a fog sprayer. It's like a smoke machine.
It's non-committal, basically. Yeah. Okay. So another super chat. Okay. Let me tell you something, Michael. Since it's not directly relevant to the topic, let Harry finish whatever he has to say.
Let's go to the
on experts, and then we come back to your super chats again, so that no one is bitter. We will start with the super chats. I'll try to introduce the member questions. We have a hard stop at the hour, 9 o'clock UK time. But be assured, dear members, if your question is not asked today, it's going to be asked next week. At some point, it's going to be asked. Worst case, at some point, we're going to have an episode only for questions that haven't been answered yet. Actually, not worst case. That should be a fun episode. Okay, let's go, Harry.
Get to the meat.
Experts.
Let's get to the application. And first, I want to say again about evolutionary psychology. It's a contradiction in terms. Evolution is a causal factor that explains why certain genes that cause certain behaviors and certain features are selected. It relies upon natural selection, and it says since this gene enables the organism to digest grass, it has survival value in a grassy environment. Since that gene, which makes a brilliant display on the coat of the organism, attracts attention of predators to a greater extent than it selects for mates, it's selected against. It's anti-survival. So the premise of natural selection and an evolutionary explanation is that genes cause behavior. Elements that can be selected for or against are the cause of behavior. Now, that is not true of human psychology. Human psychology means the content of your brain, your values, your soul, if you want to use this word with mystical connotations, the content of your thoughts that you have put in there over your life, because you don't have any thoughts when you're born. You're born tabula rasa, like a blank slate, as Aristotle said. And your experiences make possible you to advance to the conceptual level where you integrate them and see common denominators, and you form concepts and you test judgments using those concepts. All of that is directed by you. It's not directed by your genes. If it were, all the evolutionary psychologists would be trapped. They couldn't say, well, the so-and-so gene produces aggressive behavior. They would have to say, my genes force me to believe that the so-and-so gene causes aggressive behavior. I've got a gene for believing evolutionary psychology. And it's got survival values. That's why. Oh, really? Do you know you have a gene? Well, no, I have a gene that makes me say I have a gene for evolutionary psych, for believing in. So this is the trap that any determinist gets into. It's all fine to say of another species, like if there were Martians, you know, those Martians, their brains are run by their genes or by their environment. But you can't say it about yourself. And if you include yourself in the human race, you can't say it about the human race. So I can't say, you know, everything I say is just something that environment or genes made me say. I don't know if they're true or false. I just know I'm helpless to believe otherwise. And I don't know if that's true or false. I just know I'm helpless to, no, I don't know that. I can't help believing that I can't help believing that I can't help believing that there's no way even to utter a statement under the determinist philosophy. You have to admit your mind is under your control. You are not insane. Thoughts are not fed you by mysterious forces. You control your thinking. But if you control your thinking, you control your desires. Not instantly, but over the long run. You form them by your thinking. Correct thinking or incorrect thinking. Good, rational thinking or emotional pseudo thinking. And you can change them by straightening out your thinking. And that's what cognitive behavior therapy does, or purports to do. I think it does to some extent. I think it can be improved. So you can change your aggressive tendencies if you have that. You acquired them. Then we're not born into you. What's born into you are the things you can observe in infants. Some of them have a lot of energy and move around a lot. Others are fairly placid. That's born into them. Some people get flare-ups of emotion that quickly die down. They have a short time course and a high peak. Others seem to be lethargic. That's a bad word because they may be better off. They have a longer and milder time course of when the emotions come and when they wash out of the system. That can be physiological. But that you like programming, that you believe in evolutionary psychology, that you've decided you want a mate, so to speak, a spouse of having qualities A, B, and C. That's not a matter of genes, that's a matter of your thinking. So an expert who comes on and says, well, look, you just don't know the research. They did a study where they showed blah, blah, blah. You know, you do not listen to that. I mean, you can listen to it, and I have, but you know it's wrong. You know it's wrong because it's impossible that there is a gene for believing something. It's impossible that there's a gene for forming certain values. It's impossible that there are genes that run your brain and you don't have any control. And yet that's the premise of evolutionary psychology. So it's not a rational field. It fails on the second level. And also it fails on a lot of the other levels. Like, for instance, it doesn't make sense philosophically. It doesn't, there are counter experts for any theory that you find saying, well, evolution favored X because of Y. You can find evolution did not favor X because there's Z. You know, they make up a likely story. That's how the evolutionary psychology functions. They find that a lot of people get angry when they're insulted. You say, well, why would that have evolutionary survival value? Well, maybe I mean, this is one of the things that they come up with. Maybe the reason is if people got insulted, a tribal chief's power over them would be limited, and he couldn't just get angry and kill everybody in the tribe. Or maybe if people get angry when they're insulted, it's because mates view that as a sign of health and want to mate with men who get angry when they're insulted because it's macho. Yeah, you can make up things. Maybe I'll make up something right now. Maybe in the environment in which man evolved in the African savanna, there was not enough water, and people who got angry a lot expelled a lot of salts in their sweat, and so they kept a better pH balance. You can make up something. Maybe but the obvious explanation is that anger is the emotion you feel when you've been treated unjustly. And if you've been insulted and you view yourself as not deserving of that insult, you view that as being treated unjustly. So, I mean, let's look at the mind of the person. Let's look at what anger is. Oh, that's never done. We don't do that. That's for philosophers, not psychologists. So that's one example of a field that you can rule out experts in without even listening to them. I could tell you other stories, but let's move on to the more interesting one. Global warming, climate change. There are supposedly 97% of scientists, climate scientists, say man does face global warming, and it's in part caused by human activities. Yeah, well, that's not the thesis that's interesting. It's going to get a little warmer, and all the smoke that we make contributes to that. Yeah, who would disagree with that? I mean, maybe not, but why is that an issue? The issue is catastrophic global warming. Global warming that we should be scared about. Global warming that we should do something about now before it's too late. It may already be too late. That's the issue that you would never find even half the scientists agreeing to, but certainly it's not 97%. I've seen the survey that they sent out and got this 97% figure long ago. And it said, do you think mankind contributes to the warming of the atmosphere? Yeah, I think that. How can you evaluate the experts in this field as a layman? How can we, the people who claim to be experts are experts. Climate science is a rational field in principle. There are no gurus in it. I mean, maybe Al Gore, but basically there's no one going around saying he's got the revealed truth. They can explain it in a general way. Look, you know how a greenhouse works, right? It warms up because the radiated heat cannot escape as easily. It's reflected back. Well, the smoke in the atmosphere creates that kind of blanket. And so, okay, that's plausible. But it doesn't, there are several things that it flunks on. And one is your own experience. There's only one question you have to ask to know that catastrophic global warming, as advocated by these scientists, is arbitrary to be dismissed. I mean, maybe there'll be catastrophic global warming in 20 years. Maybe there'll be catastrophic cooling in 20 years. I shouldn't say maybe. I'm not saying it's impossible that something bad would happen. One way or the other, an asteroid could hit the Earth. What I'm saying is that these guys don't know what they're talking about, and their statements are of no cognitive value. How do we know that? I claim we all know that. Every one of us, everybody over the age of about 12 has the information to know this. Well, how long have they been predicting catastrophic global warming? Now, let's understand, they predict it for the future, right? They don't say it's coming tomorrow, but 30 years, 50 years. Now, if it's 100 years, the thesis kind of falls apart, right? Because if something's going to happen in 100 years, forget about it. It's too far out to even plan for. You don't know what the conditions will be like then. You don't know what technology will be like then. But I think Al Gore was saying 20 years was a time frame of real disastrous result. All right, how long have they been saying this? I sent away for Newsweek magazine, January 26, 1970, The Ravaged Environment, 1970, 51 years ago. And there's a statement in here along with we're destroying this and that and the other, and it's hopeless. And look at this. I don't know if you can see this picture. Junk cars are piling up. We're going to be swimming in cars. There are too many people on the earth. There's all these cans. It's going to be disaster. And it has this statement, if I didn't bookmark the place, that some scientists like to play with the idea that a global warming is occurring, and pretty soon the planet will be uninhabitable. Others like the Ice Age hypothesis, which was big at this time. 51 years ago. What about more recent things like 1988? There was a big conference and a big hearing in Washington in 1988. James Hansen of NASA testified there about the disaster of global warming. Was that 36 years ago, 37 years ago? No, my math is 33 years ago. What has happened? This is why I say even a 12-year-old can know this. What has happened in those 33 years? Nothing. Do you think weather in your area is markedly different now than it was in 1988 or 1970? I venture to say it's not markedly different than it was in 1921. 100 years ago. Think of world capitals that you know: Paris, London, New York, Tokyo, Seoul, Sydney. Have any of them changed noticeably in their climate? Has sea level risen above their barriers in either 50 or 34 years, depending upon how you look at it? I mean, I would think that's enough time that if there were a big disaster brewing, it would be starting. Now, you'll read things, oh, hottest year on record, and blah, blah, blah. Is it much different? No. Is it really the hottest year on record? No. They massaged the statistics. During the Dust Bowl era, temperatures were hotter than they've been in recent years in the United States. I don't know about England's situation or other countries, but basically, nothing's happening. Sure, okay, if you make very precise measurements, which are very hard to do, you can say, you know, winter ends about a week earlier now in the average place than it did. Maybe you can say that. But basically, Paris in the summer is Paris in the summer when Gertrude Stein and Ernest Hemingway and all that crowd was there in the 20s. Sydney, Australia is the same as it was. New York is the same as it was. Every place, Los Angeles. It isn't that Los Angeles is now uninhabitable due to weather. It's uninhabitable due to politics. The weather hasn't changed. Okay, you know, sure, yeah, it's changed a little. In 50 years, in 100 years, it's changed a little. And because of that, we separate our trash into different garbage bags, and we're pushing electric vehicles as if that were some kind of solution. And Biden said that the greatest national security threat to the United States is climate change. So you don't need to go in and find, as people have done, because we get to are there counter expert? Yeah, they're counter experts. People at places like MIT, Richard Lindzen, and other really well regarded places. I happen to know his name because I went to MIT. There are considerable counter experts. Maybe they're only 10%, but we're not talking about Joe the plumber in Nome, Alaska. We're talking about full professors at MIT and several others in other places. So yeah, they're counter experts, but all you need to do is say, look, they've been predicting this disaster for a generation or 2 generations, depending upon how you look at it. And not only has it not even started, nothing much has happened in a century. And then there's the cherry on the cake, but I do need to make 2 points. So the predictions are wrong. There's something wrong. What about this change in terminology? Global warming, no, we don't say that anymore. We say climate change. Why do we say that? Because the global warming didn't happen. And we want to be able to, whenever there's unusual weather, we want to be able to say, aha, it got cold, people froze, that's part of climate change. Aha, it rained a lot, that's climate change. Aha, there are more hurricanes, that's climate change. Incidentally, there are fewer hurricanes, but you need to look at the actual data to get that. Now, this is the discrediting of the entire movement. All you need to know is 2 things. It hasn't happened in a century. Not that they've been predicting it for a century, only half a century. And they changed the name of it from global warming to climate change. Now, how would you feel about a stock market advisor who said, for 30 or 40 or 50 years said, depression is coming. The stock market is going down to 200. The Dow is going down to 200. The FTSE is going to fall to 1/10 of its value. People will be lining up in the streets for handouts, for soup, like in the Depression. People are going to be massively out of work. And he keeps saying this, and even though there are downturns and up there, it never happens after 50 years. And then he says, you know, market change is coming. The Dow is going to change. It's going to change enormously. I won't tell you whether it's up or down, but it's going to change. Maybe not this year, but it's going to change. And we have to have the precautionary principle. Since it's going to change, we have to slit our wrists now to avoid it. Okay. The other issue is motive. What is the motive of the scientists who are pushing? And there's a small number of dedicated scientists at the core of this, and we saw this in the email, the ClimateGate disaster coming out of the UK, Hadley. What is their motive? Grants. That you don't get funding for finding out, well, no, there's not much going on. You get funding when the public gets alarmed and says, we need to do something. We need to find out. We need to measure. We need to look at this. Beware. Look out. That's where the money comes from. Now, I've read, you know, the defenses from, I don't just read my own side. I've read the dissensus, the explanation from people like Michael Mann and the James Hansen and Gavin Schmidt and so forth. I know those sites. I haven't looked at them in a couple of years, but I delve into them, and the science can absolutely baffle you. It gets very technical very quick. But they say, look, if I wanted to make a lot of money, I wouldn't have gone into climate science. I would have tried to do lots of other things, have more money than climate science. How does that stand up? He did go into climate science. Now, being in climate science at the age of 50, he wants a grant. Did you know, I know scientists. Half or more of what they do is spend time trying to get grants. They write grants proposals. They confab with colleagues about what could be done that would get funding. Science is in the pocket of government. It's money handed out for sexy topics that get the public aroused and excited and alarmed. So that is the motive behind the continued failure. They have models. It's all based on models. The whole thing is based upon model. You know what a model is. You write an equation, put it in a computer, write another equation, put it into the computer, set certain variables. Well, let's assume that the salinity of the sea will go up 1% in the next 20 years. Let's assume that cloud cover, the early models didn't even have clouds in them, by the way. Let's assume that cloud cover increases by 5% over 10 years. And you tweak all these variables, you can get whatever you want. If you know anything about simulations and computers, they follow reality or they involve guesses at what variables are going to be. Some simulations follow reality. When you look at virtual reality, like I just bought, and you see, you know, a ball made to bounce, all this great rendering that they can do of things with CAD CAM and so forth. They're not guessing, well, let's say that the light increases 5% when it reflects. They know what it increases. But if you're guessing at the variables change the results. So
Harry, shall I ask, can I ask you to sum up then go? Because we already have 5 questions
I just got
pending.
one more point to sum up.
Yeah.
Let's say that there is global warming coming and it's more than you'd want. I want global warming. Most people want global warming. That's why they moved to the Sun Belt. But let's assume it's coming and it's bad and it's going to be here in 50 years. Technology trivializes this. Technology in 50 years from now, judging by where technology was in 1971, so today, it's going to be a different world. It's going to be different answers, and it's insane to imagine that we will try to cope with whatever might be thrown at us with today's technology. That was my last point.
Thank you, Harry. That was a good way to end it. So we have many questions. Can you stay for 8-9 minutes more?
Sure.
Good. Thank you. Okay. So Michael asks, is our late stage mixed economy oppressive enough to the point where if you start on the bottom, you cannot rise up without government assistance? So is there
in some countries that's true. In other words, what the intervention of government does is it freezes, it puts sand in the gears and it freezes everything. For instance, I have the guy who runs a local barbecue wants to open a second store, and he's had to get permits. It's taken 17 months. He just yesterday got the final permit. So in a free economy, he wouldn't have to get a single permit. Government would have nothing to say about his building or opening a store or building a building. So the effective intervention is to freeze everything in place. And that means the people on top stay on top. And it means it's hard for the people at the bottom to get up. And the more controlled the economy is, like in France, I imagine it's impossible. Almost impossible. It takes extraordinary ability and tenacity to do it. But in the US, there's still a fair amount of mobility. It's a lot less than it would be under freedom.
Same in Greece. It would be difficult to imagine someone making it without government assistance. It could happen, but it would be an exception.
Mm-hmm.
Another super chat question. What's the difference between sensation, perception, concept, abstraction?
Well, what about questions on this topic? I can answer that very readily, but I don't agree with the view of psychology of perception that Ayn Rand held in regard to sensations. I don't think that human beings go through a sensation stage. I think the proper use of the term sensation is for the smallest aspect of a perceptual sense. For instance, brightness for vision, or loudness for hearing, or warmth for touch. But I don't believe that we begin, as was believed at the end of the 19th century, that we begin in infancy in a sensation stage where all we have is brightness and loudness and feelings, and we somehow put them together into a perceptual awareness where we see things. I think we see things from the start. And I do think we integrate how things feel and how things taste with how they look. So that's a different thing. That's different elements of the perceptual whole. So I don't agree with that. I don't use the term sensation. So perception is an ongoing awareness of entities in the world arranged spatially within which we move and act. That's my definition of perception. So it's seeing, hearing, not really smelling. That's a primitive form that on its own. For a dog, smelling is perception, but for a human being, it's not arrayed in space. For taste also, it's not really the perceptual level. It's a more primitive thing. But, you know, the objects in the world out there, here, that you see and hear coming from there, that's perception. And as you move around, perception is not passive, it's active. And the psychological experiments on perception confirm this. Concepts are words that are given a meaning that embraces all things that of a certain kind, like table, dog, camera, and more abstract things. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Sorry, you said words.
Yeah, they are held in words. Words are the form in which we know them, not proper names, because that stands for one thing. But a concept is a general idea for all things of a certain kind.
Don't you define them as mental entities in the book?
It is the concept. If you're I'm trying to build up from a simple-minded, okay, in simple terms. Animals don't talk, man does. In more complex terms, man has reason, the animals don't. In more complex terms, man has concepts, animals don't. Those concepts are held in words. There are no concepts that are not held in words. That's at best a concept on the way to being formed. The word is the integrator of the thing. It's the file folder, to use Ayn Rand's example, into which we put information about things of a certain kind. So if I say to you, paramecium, even though that's not something, you know, I didn't say apple, as in paramecium, certain things you've stored under that concept. It's small, it's one-celled, you have to see it under a microscope, it moves around. Maybe you remember it's shaped sort of like a slipper. It has a nucleus. And now we're at the end of cytoplasm. Now we're at the end of my understanding of paramecia. So a concept is a general idea for all things of a certain kind. Now there are kinds of kinds. A paramecium is an organism. An organism is an entity. Those entity is very abstract compared to paramecium. Well, actually it's a special case because you learn it very early because it's axiomatic. Let's take organism. Did you know that the ancient Greeks, your Greek, I don't know if it's pre-Plato or around the time of Plato, they discovered that plants were alive. They didn't think of living organisms as including plants. And Plato says they have the ability to move themselves, not in space, but they grow. And so they are really the same as animals in a higher, more abstract sense. Here's a much simpler explanation of abstractness. 2, the number that comes after 1, 1, 2. Number. Oh, now we got 2,725,000. Mental tool. Now we've included numbers with words and with logical operation. So you get more abstract. You can get more abstract starting with 2, going to number, going to mathematical tool, going to tool. So you get the scale of abstraction. You get kinds of kinds and kinds of kinds of kinds. And then there's the other direction, subkinds, sub-subkinds, and cross-kinds. Like you have wine and then you have red wine. And then you have vintage red wine. Okay, that's sub-narrowing in. So, okay. What was the last one you wanted to know about?
Concept versus abstraction.
The term, if you're using it as a noun, not as abstract versus concrete, you're using an abstraction. It's 100% synonymous with concept.
Okay.
Two terms for the same thing.
Thank you.
If you mean the process, it's something else.
Two more questions. So the question is, what comes first, consciousness or motion?
Or motion? He probably means in evolution, because if you say in ontogenesis, in your own development, motion comes first, right? If you're talking in evolution, motion has to come first. There are non-conscious. All living organisms move, even if they just move their parts, like trees raise the sap up and grow out towards the sun and so forth, and send their roots down for water. But all living organisms are capable of internally generated motions. That's metabolism. Without that, they wouldn't be alive. So if you're talking about in evolution, motion comes first too. Now, if you're talking about an adult human being, consciousness comes first, or else you're drunk. So if you find, oh my God, I'm walking over here, I didn't know I was doing that. There's something very wrong. So the idea of what you want precedes your choice of action as to how to get it.
Good. And one more super chat. Our friend Atlas spoke. Thank you so much. So he says some very kind words. Thank you very much for that. And the question. So Harry, will there ever be a new updated edition of the Ayn Rand lexicon, for example, with Opar?
No, because the Ayn Rand lexicon, which I have here, and you can get it online. I'm not going to show you the below because I changed the cover. I don't like the cover that they gave me. The Ayn Rand lexicon is only official objectivist material. And that I have included a couple of things from Leonard Peikoff and from me that were stated while Ayn Rand was alive, and we have reason to believe that she endorsed them, or at least did not object to them. But that's about 2% of the book, maybe with Dr. Peikoff, 10% of the book. It's basically Ayn Rand. So objectivism is closed. It closed with Ayn Rand's death. It cannot be expanded. Philosophy can grow, but objectivism, what Ayn Rand's, just like Aristotle's philosophy is closed. Plato's philosophy is closed. It can't be expanded. You can't bring back Plato and have him say, oh, and speaking of technology, yeah, it's not going to be expanded. There's, I think somebody pointed out one thing I left out, which I can't remember now, but there are 400 topics in there. Everything from abortion, A, to zero, reification of, for Z. So it's A to Z, 400 topics. It's got more than you need. And the other sources are valuable, but they're not that brand.
That makes sense. So huge thanks to those of you who have been with us and sending super chats and supporting us. A big thank you to the Ayn Rand Institute for supporting this series. Just let me say one more thing, Harry. I was making short clips where people can find in Ayn Rand Institute Global, Facebook and Twitter, but also the Ayn Rand Center UK is producing short clips. I was making short clips from your discussion with Don Watkins last week, but at some point I thought, although the short clips are brilliant, the whole episode as a whole is at the highest level. So it's an experience which I think people seeing you and Don interacting was great. So it has been my favorite episode. And I encourage people to check it out if they've missed it. And maybe next week I'm going to say this for this episode, but usually I integrate things when I'm making the short clip. So again, this is like free philosophy lessons for all of us. So many thanks to Harry for doing this. Next week, the topic is perfection. So is it possible to be perfect? Is it a dream? Or is perfection something that we orient ourselves to knowing we're never going to reach it? So all that next week. Many thanks, Harry. Many thanks to our viewers. Have a good week. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.